Good morning. It is good to be here this morning. I am very thankful for the opportunity to be at camp last weekend, and what an awesome experience that was to be with a group down there and to hear the different men speak to us. Wade spoke last Sunday morning down at camp. I appreciate Gene and his willingness to fill in here, and then Wednesday night I appreciate Roger and the singing night that was organized and conducted. Appreciate so much all that helped with that. As always, it's fun to be on vacation for a little while, and it's always good to be back home. We're thankful to be safe and well and to be back here this morning. I'm in Acts chapter 14. I'd love to have you join me there in your Bible in Acts chapter 14. As we've been studying the church, we've been looking at the church of the first century and asking ourselves what it is about them that is important for you and I today. And what I'm looking for this morning is I'm looking for a church that can see. A church that can see. In Acts chapter 14, just to put yourself in the context so that we're not accused of taking anything out of context, Paul and Barnabas are on that first missionary journey. They're in the second half of it, and according to Acts chapter 14, they go to places like Iconium, and they go to Lystra. Paul nearly faces death in Lystra before they eventually go in Acts chapter 14 to Antioch in Syria. And so they visit 3 different cities in this one chapter as they decide to continue this missionary journey, and they're traveling along, establishing and visiting and encouraging and teaching the gospel to the world around as they spread out from Jerusalem. And now they've spread out through all Judea and Samaria, and now we're going to the ends of the known world. What is it in Acts chapter 14 that we need to see? Seeing is a very valuable tool, is it not? My family and I, we pay dearly every year to be able to see. We're 4 out of 5 now that's wearing the spectacles, right? And so we all have glasses now, and Miss Chastity and I have contacts, and we go see the eye doctor, and the irony of that is that she and I are both nearsighted. So it makes perfect sense to me what nearsighted looks like. I'm not an eye doctor, don't claim to be one, know nothing about it. I just know that if I take my contacts out, I couldn't see you. And so that makes perfect sense to me. I could hold this Bible right here, and I could read it, and I could see it without my glasses or contacts. But I couldn't see you. Well, that's perfectly obvious, right? Well, little man comes along here, and now he's farsighted, which makes sense because as you watch him throughout the day until the glasses came along, he starts out in the morning watching TV on the couch. By the end of the day, he's standing right in front of the TV. Now, it's an old TV, and we've had it for a while, but it is a 50-inch TV, okay? He ought to be able to see it, right? But as the day goes on, he would move closer to the TV. I don't understand that for the life of me. How my son can see something way out yonder, but he can't see something right up close. He's farsighted. I don't know where he got those genes, but obviously he got them. That makes absolutely no sense to me. When he's trying to look out yonder, you'll catch him looking like, excuse me, older gentlemen, you'll catch him looking like an old man over his glasses, right? He's looking way out yonder, but then when he looks up close, he has to look through his glasses. Confusing. Odd. Weird. That you could see out there, but you can't see. And here's what I'm admitting to you. I know a lot of churches that are farsighted. I know a lot of churches that can see way, way out yonder, but they are blind up close. And so what I'm looking for is I'm looking for a church that can see, not being farsighted or nearsighted. Neither one of them is good or desirable. I'm looking for a church that can see the right here, right now, everything around them. I'm also looking for a church that has the ability to see afar off. What are we trying to see? Well, the first thing from Acts chapter 14 that I want to point out that we need to be seeing is God. Miss Chastity and I took a trip of a lifetime. We enjoyed it thoroughly. We've got a lot of memories and a lot of things that we saw, that we took pictures of, that the pictures just, they're just pictures, okay? It's some things that you just have to see to believe. Pictures can't capture it. And over and over and over this week, I heard my wife say, "That's God." And I'm going, "Where?" And we drive a little further and she'd say, "Look at that. That's God." Meaning, man hasn't touched that. It's just the landscape. Oh, we saw a lot of things that man has made and man has done, but there was a lot of landscape that was just natural. And the reality of being able to see God. Isn't it hard sometimes when you get caught up in life? Isn't it easy to miss God? Isn't it easy to get so bombarded and so busy and so routine and so in the moment that you miss God? And unfortunately, if we're not careful as a church, we can get so caught up in the routine and the traditions of things that we miss God. I want you to see God with me. Look in verse 1. Acts chapter 14. A great number of both Jews and Greeks believed. Do you see God? What are they believing? They're believing what they're being taught. What are they being taught? Look at verse 3. Paul and Barnabas remained for a long time speaking boldly for the Lord, bearing witness to His grace. What are they seeing? Signs and wonders, verse 3, done by their hands. Do you see God? Not only are they teaching them about who God is, but they're also living before them as God would have them to live. And then thirdly, they are conducting miraculous signs and wonders. Why? Because God gives them the ability to do so. Do you see God? Coming from their mouths, coming from their lives, coming from the works of their hands. Verse 6. They learned of it. They learned of what? Well, if you read verse 5, they learned of their desire to stone them. And when they had learned of it, they fled to Lystra and Derbe, cities of Lycaonia, and to the surrounding country. And there, verse 7, they continued to preach the gospel. Do you see God working to help Barnabas and Paul escape from death? Paul and Barnabas are about to be stoned. They're in Iconium. And God is working to inform them, verse 6, so that they might go on, verse 7, and continue to preach. Do you see God? They get to Lystra, verse 8, and there's a man there who's crippled and is unable to walk. He's a lame man. Look at verse 10. And in a loud voice, stand upright on your feet. Paul looks at this man, and again, by miraculous powers, these signs and wonders, do you see God healing this man miraculously, allowing him to stand up, verse 10, and to begin to walk, and the crowds began to see. Maybe just one more for time's sake. You come over into the 19th verse, and we're still in Lystra. Verse 20, the disciples gather, and they rise up and enter the city, and they went to Barnabas. Verse 21, when they had preached, they were strengthening the souls of the disciples. They returned to Lystra and Iconium, places they had already been, strengthening the souls. And they go on in verse 23, and appoint elders for them in every church. But do you see what happens in verse 19? They stone Paul. And they drag him out of the city. How does Paul get up and go back to Lystra and Iconium? How does Paul and Barnabas continue to get the opportunity to make disciples and to strengthen the disciples and to encourage the disciples and to go around to every city and church and appoint elders within them? Do you see God? Paul was all but dead, stoned to death. Do you see God? Is it the case this morning that we as a church need to stop, pause, stand still, and know God? In Daniel chapter 4, King Nebuchadnezzar has this dream about a tree, and it terrifies him. And he gets Daniel to come in, and Daniel starts to tell him the dream, the interpretation of it, and how the tree is going to be cut down, and there's going to be a great stump there, and there's going to be a band put around the stump. Oh, there's a lot of details there. The tree is great. It's big. I saw the largest tree on earth last week now. It's a big tree. But the point's found in verse 25 of Daniel chapter 4, where Daniel says to King Nebuchadnezzar, this is all going to be done so that you will know that the Most High reigns in the kingdom of men. And he gives them to whom he will. Don't you lose sight of God. God is in control here. God is the one that is directing and guiding. God is the one that is the ultimate ruler and authority. Don't lose focus on God. God is all through Acts chapter 14. You got to see him, church. Not only in the spiritual things in life, but then in the physical thing, the routine, the mundane things of life, the everyday provisions of life. There is God. Don't miss him. But then also in Acts chapter 14, I want you to see the enemy. See the enemy. As I think about riding around, seeing God this week, there was a few times when the sun came out this week. I understand there was a few times it came out here, very few. You know what I hate about the sun? I'll just be honest with you. Can I be straight with you? I hate the sun because it brings out skin. Now, you guys in the room, you understand what I'm talking about. You see, when it's cold, I don't have a problem with my eyes. People put on clothes when it's cold. And for the most part, it was cold this week where we were. The sun comes out and skin comes out. There's my enemy. While my wife is riding around seeing God, there's also the enemy. Do you see the enemy? Do you know who the enemy is? I'm telling you who mine is. I'm telling you where mine's at. What about you? What's your enemy? You got one. Don't lie to yourself. What is it? Where is it? Can you see it? I want you to go back to Acts 14. And all the good that's going on here, there's an enemy. Look at verse 2. But the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles, poisoned their minds against the brethren. I want you to see the enemy, verse 4. But the people of the city were divided. Oh, one of the greatest enemies of a church is division. One of the greatest tools that Satan, the enemy, has is to get people who are supposedly on the same page divided. Look at verse 5. The attempt was made to mistreat and stone them. Persecution. The only way we're going to get these people to hush is to kill them. The only way we're going to get this gospel stuff about Jesus to quiet down is to mistreat them and to persecute them, to kill some of them, to let these people know we mean business. When we say stop talking about Jesus, we mean it. The enemy. The enemy's out there. In the passage that Marty read a moment ago from Ephesians 6, the whole armor of God. Why do we need the whole armor of God? Because verse 12 tells us in that passage that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We wrestle against the principalities and the powers of the darkness of this age. We wrestle against the rulers of darkness. Verse 16 of that passage in Ephesians 6 tells us that the enemy has flaming, fiery darts. I've got the image of Robin Hood, right? You know my image. It's the bow and arrow. It's the torch on the end. It's striking the match and lighting it up and firing it into one of those leather hide huts and straw and just whoo. The enemy is shooting darts of fire at us. Trying to divide, trying to persecute, trying to stir up, trying to mistreat, trying to poison our lives with iniquity and sin and ungodliness. Verse 13. Ultimately, they try, that is the priests of Zeus, at the temple of the entrance of the city, to bring oxen and garland to the gates and offer sacrifices to idols. They began to worship Paul and Barnabas, and they began to call them gods. And what you see in verse 13 is an attempt to come out and offer sacrifices to Paul and Barnabas. To offer worship to mere men. To their gods, little g of the day. Idol worship. The enemy. Oh, the enemy is right there. The enemy is all in it. The enemy is everywhere. You and I must realize that the enemy is all around us. He's constantly lurking, Peter says, as a roaring lion. He's ready with a whole basket of lies, Jesus says in John 8. The father of them, seeking to deceive and to fire that dart into mine and your lives. As much as we look around, church, and need to see God, we also have got to look around and see the enemy. Know who the enemy is. Be prepared to defend and protect yourself against the enemy. But then there's one more. And then the lesson's yours. It's being able to see the lost. I'm looking for a church that can see the lost. Why? Why would we ever want to see the lost? Could I recommend because we see God? We ought to see the lost. Could I recommend it's because we see the enemy that we want to see the lost? I know many of you have traveled much farther than I have. But I sent a text message to a friend of mine yesterday, and I said, man, I am ready for some southern hospitality. I could care less about sweet tea. I'm trying to quit that habit. Water's fine. But there is a thing called southern hospitality. And if you ain't left the South, you don't understand that when you do, you leave it behind. I probably shouldn't, and I don't guess I will, but my wife had a comment this week. If I'd have said it, I would repeat it. But since she said it and I don't have her permission, I won't repeat it. I think it was spot on, what she said. And it's not exactly, but the point of what she said is there's a lot of lost people. There really are. And the problem is you don't have to travel far to find them. Don't get farsighted on me here. There are lost people far out in the world, absolutely. But don't get farsighted on me here. Be able to see what is near. There are lost people right here. In Acts chapter 14, beginning in verse 21, I go back to that. They preached the gospel to people who needed to hear the gospel. So that what? So that disciples might be made. So that lives might be converted. So that Christianity might be extended. So that souls might be won. So that eternities might be transformed. They preached the gospel. And many disciples were made. Verse 22, they strengthened the souls of the disciples and they encouraged them. Those who were already Christians needed strengthening. They needed encouraging. They needed to be held up. They needed to be built up. They needed to be supported. They needed to be reminded. They needed to be edified. There were those who were lost, who needed to know they were lost. There were those who were struggling to be faithful to the Lord, who needed to know they were struggling. Folks, we got to see faces. We got to see lives. We got to see eternity. To be able to see the lost. I'm looking for a church that makes her one and only mission to make disciples. And having made disciples, or in the process of making disciples, I'm looking for a church who is making as a priority her goal to keep and help those stay faithful. Because The Bible still says what it says. Broad is the way, and wide is the gate that leads to destruction. And many there be who go by it. We got to be able to see the lost, church. And having seen them, remove the clouds of distraction to embrace them. There are many clouds, aren't there? We got the joy of flying through several yesterday. Some were a little unkind. They all distract. They all blind. They all have the ability to take us off course. What are they? Well, I've already mentioned some. Apathy, indifference, routine, busyness, self-satisfaction. Any of the above, all of the above, or some that are not above. Clouds to cause you to lose focus, and me. I'm looking for a church that can see their need for God. There is not a day goes by that you don't need God. I'm looking for a church that can see their need for Jesus, who died on the cross, the great physician that can and will heal all sin diseases. I'm looking for a church that recognizes there's an enemy. And it might just be this morning that the enemy has you around the neck. We can help you break the enemy's hold if you let us. The great physician can remove the enemy and the stranglehold that the enemy has on your life if you let him. Looking for a church that can see the lost, because that's what it's all about. Helping people find a way, find the way, find the only way, find the one way to heaven. And if you're here this morning and you need to get back on that way, would you come right now as we stand and sing?